we go. Hey guys, in a world dominated by patriarchal religious narratives, the call to embrace the divine feminine is not just a whisper on the fringes of theology, it's a resounding echo for a transformation that challenges us to radically rethink how we perceive divinity, gender, and spirituality altogether. So, welcome back, folks. I am super excited today for you to be captivated as we delve into the empowering world of the divine feminine with our special guest today, Trista Hendren. Trista is a passionate advocate and renowned author. She weaves her unique Christian Muslim heritage into a tapestry of inclusivity and narratives that challenge patriarchal norms. So through her dynamic works like The Girl God and Tell Me Why, Trista has been stoking a global conversation on divinity, gender, and religion, making her a beacon for progressive thinking. With her inclusive outlook that welcomes warmly the queer communities and her commitment to bridging divides, she exemplifies how rich a diverse dialogue can be. Brace yourselves for an entertaining, enlightening deep dive into the transformative power of the divine feminine as we have a killer conversation with Trista. Here we go. Hi, Trista. How are you doing today?
I'm well, Michael J. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
I love doing this. And, it makes me super happy when we get to do stuff around the world. And it's just like we're sitting next to each other having a conversation. You are in Norway. That is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's just like you're like sitting right next door to me. I love that. So uh, let's jump into the divine feminine. I think some people have heard of the divine feminine and maybe don't know what it is. So let's just start right there. Talk about what is the divine feminine, why it's significant in the world today.
Well, I think most of us have grown up with the assumption that the divine is male, because most of the world religions center upon a male god, and it's maybe not the best view of divinity, in my opinion, because it's sort of the scary male sky god who is judging you, and that, like I grew up thinking I was going to go to hell, and terrified and praying every night for forgiveness. And the divine feminine is really what I see as like a loving mother embracing you, or like a grandmother, where it's not so much about everything that you're doing wrong, it's about enhancing what could be right.
So how did you like since you had all this patriarchal stuff around you and the sky god, as you said, like how did you find out about like the divine feminine? How did that come into your life?
It was actually in college, and I um, was very, very Christian. I actually went to school to become a minister,
Oh,
and then I realized that they really just wanted me there to find a husband to be like the pastor's wife. Um, and so I actually completely lost my faith my freshman year of college and became an atheist. And then I really didn't think I would ever go back to any sort of religion whatsoever. Um, but then I discovered feminism and, ironically, Islam at the same time. So I kind of took a detour. I learned a little bit about the goddess at that time. But then I think I was looking for more of a community than what was available in Portland at that time. And I kind of found, for what worked for me at that time was the Muslim religion.
so how does feminism work with the Muslim religion? How do those two things go together? Because I immediately said those, and I'm going like they sound like they're diametrically opposed.
Yeah, I think that is the opinion of most people. And I would say in some ways, most patriarchal religions don't mix well with feminism, but there are quite a few Muslim feminists and quite a few queer Muslims as well. Um, for me, because I was in such a very fundamentalist version of Christianity, Islam was actually progressive for me at that time.
Wow. Okay.
Uh, so it's really all relative, because just like Christianity, Islam also has, like, different sects, different, depending on where you are in the world, where you're practicing. I mean, there's some views, I would say, within the Muslim community And I would say in some ways, Muslims have been more accepting of my work than some of the Christians that I know. But it really depends on the group. So
So how did you, I guess, commingle or separate, whichever way it happened, the Christianity and the Muslim, and then somehow you mixed in the queer and the divine feminine and feminism. How did you mix all of these things together?
I am not kind of a black and white person. I think I've always and I don't really like being like labeled one thing or another. So I think they've all kind of worked for me on some level. I grew up with um, sort of a pamphlet from like a Christian pamphlet of like all the world religions and why they were wrong. So I really didn't want to raise my children in that sort of environment. Um, and also, kind of at the same time, my grandparents were getting very elderly, and their church was very important to them. And they went to a United Church of Christ,
Uh-huh.
which is very kind of more on the liberal side of things. And so I became very active in that church, and I started taking them to church so they could go to their services because I adored my grandparents. And then I don't know, I just I was Muslim at the time I started going to that church, and then wanted to raise my kids in sort of an interfaith environment. But at the time, I didn't completely think that through because I felt like it worked fine for my son, but not so much for my daughter. Um, so that's kind of what brought in more fully the divine feminine into my life for me and my family.
What was the first thing, like you were doing all the patriarchal stuff, you're doing your Muslimism and your Christianism and all this kind of stuff. And then what sparked is like, I'm gonna go way out of this, I'm gonna go toward the divine feminine. Like, how did that happen? I know you said college, but
Yeah, I think within feminism, there isn't a lot of look at religion, and either it's like people embrace the religion that they still grew up in, or they reject religion entirely. And I think I've always been sort of a person of faith where I need my spirituality. I think um, the rituals and that kind of thing, even now, is very important to me, like having my children involved in meaningful ceremonies and things that you do every year, and this time of year we're going to do this and this time of year we're going to do that. But my daughter was actually really my huge wake up call because I think sometimes we don't see the way that we're oppressing ourselves, but we can see it in our children and realize like, oh wow, this is not okay. So my daughter was really my mirror and wake up call.
gotcha. So you started with the divine feminism. How does the divine feminine interact well or not well with traditional religions?
um, I think theoretically they could coexist, but I think a lot of people that are, especially in more fundamentalist sects of their religion, like even for me growing up in Christianity, like the goddess for a long time was a scary word. Even after I left the church, it was still like I had a real like allergic reaction to using that term because we're, taught that, and I would say reading the Old Testament and the New Testament, neither are really nice or progressive books. They're kind of pretty negative towards goddess culture.
Mhm.
So, and it's like pagan and it's evil and it's worshiping idols and all these things. So I think you really have to take like several steps before you can get there. Um, so I think they could, but it it takes some time. And I think also that for me, like I tried for a long time to make my spirituality and feminism and belief about divine feminine work within the traditions that I came from. But eventually, I felt like I was just trying too hard to push that, and I felt that I could um, find more meaning within just a goddess spirituality within itself.
Okay, so in a Christian modality, I guess there is the God in the sky that people worship.
Mhm.
That's how most people think of it. With the divine feminine, what is it that one worships? Is it around you? Is there a female-ish God in the sky? What is it that people are
Well, the
worshiping?
goddess is within us, within all of us, I think, and within, divine, depending on what language you like to use. Some people really like divine feminine, some people like goddess. To me, the language is not so much an issue as just the feeling of um, embracing the divine within you, which I think that we're taught in most patriarchal religions that we're sinful, that there's something wrong with us, and that's not at all the goddess tradition.
What's the end point of the goddess tradition? Like everyone wants to go to heaven when you're Christian or one of the other main standard religions, right? So what is the end like with the goddess religion?
Well, I think that's to me the problem within most patriarchal religions is like you're supposed to suffer to get to paradise, and then maybe if you're lucky, if you're good enough, then but with the goddess tradition, paradise is here and now, and it's within ourselves and the lives that we create for ourselves. Um, and of course, there are structures that make that difficult at times because we're living under patriarchy. But if we were to go back to matriarchy, in my mind, we would be living a very different existence that would be loving, child centric, woman centric, um, and not, what I consider capitalist patriarchy. It doesn't really work
Mhm.
for anyone unless you're at the 1%.
Yeah. Well, what are there some either countries or places or areas in the world where you can go and you go, wow, this is where the divine, the feminine rules as opposed to the patriarchy?
There are probably small pockets, but no, not fully. Patriarchy really has taken over the entire globe.
Mm.
And I think it's going to be a long, I don't want to say fight, but it will probably be a while before we come back into that. Um, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why men, white men, don't want um, patriarchy to end because it does empower a small group of people.
What do you see as the main differences between if we somehow flipped the script, right, and went to
Mhm.
a matriarchal society? What do you think would be different? What would happen?
Well, absolutely everything because it's based on gift sharing and living, in community with each other and honoring children, honoring both women and I mean everybody is honored. It's just not taking more than what you need. Right now we have a system where the few at the very top take so much and then so many people are left at the bottom with like nothing. And that's not how the world was meant to be. It should never have ended up that way. So to me, a reverse coming back to matriarchy would be a world where everybody was taken care of, everybody had food and shelter and love and community. I also think that we're too individualistic in our societies now, and we weren't meant to live as a single one person doing everything on our own. Mothers would not be the one who's blamed for everything. It would be a system of community where everybody is responsible when there are children and the children are wanted. And, we're doing a anthology about abortion right now. And that was the thing under matriarchy that there's always been abortion. There's always been ways that women knew they had their own inner knowing of how to regulate their pregnancies and to have children when it was the right time for both the child and the community so that um, no child went uncared for and didn't
Mhm.
have what they needed.
What kind of things like do you do in your life, like to make the matriarchy as opposed to the patriarchy thrive? What are you doing in your own home or your community or whatever?
Well, I always say that I live in my own kind of bubble, if you will, of my own mini matriarchy.
Mhm.
I would say that our home is definitely a matriarchy. My husband and I share everything. Not one of us is like doing more than the other. Um, We have a big focus on food. I love to eat. I love to cook. My husband is really good at doing other things. Um, but I think that it's just filled with life. We love having people here. We love having music. We love having, growing food and um, having like parties and community here. Like I think I sent you a picture of the goddess that my husband made. But yeah, we like to have events around her, and I think that was kind of our statement and intention with creating this. She's actually 2 tons.
Mhm.
That we really want to bring the goddess back into focus. And we kind of were staking our claim too that we really want to have a goddess community center here and everywhere really in the world, because you have churches, you have synagogues, you have mosques, you have all these patriarchal institutions, but we don't have anywhere that people could come together to share joy.
So let's do this. That's because I'm hearing in my head the patriarchy saying, "Well, we do that. We have parties. We get together with the kids. We've got schools for everybody." And what is it that is different about the divine feminine that you can go like, "Yeah, you do that, but what?"
But patriarchal religions inherently are shame based, and there's not really any way to get around that. Like, and I've tried so many times in the past to do like my mental gymnastics to make it work. But really, what it comes down to is you're not good enough. You need someone else to come in and save you. And maybe then, if you do XYZ, then you can go to heaven, or in some churches that preach more like prosperity doctrine, that you're destined to be rich or whatever.
Okay. So if we say the patriarchy is shame-based, what is the matriarchy?
Love based.
Okay, so shame-based versus love-based, and in the end, is there a place one goes? Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? Is there any concept of that, or is it life is on earth and that's what we should be doing?
Well, I mean, I'll speak for myself. My personal belief is that we go back into the earth, that we're kind of are recycled, that we are always a spirit and a soul that lives on in different ways. And I always joke about like what I would like to come back as, depending on the day. It might be a cat or a dog, or usually not a person. Not in this current environment anyway. Although I will say it's a little bit better in Norway, but in the US, I think being a woman right now is quite difficult.
Mm.
So I think I would rather come back as a cat.
If you could come back as a cat, that would be awesome. So give me some examples of how the divine feminine has played out in your life and you've seen it do better than what might happen if it was the normal patriarchy.
I think I would go to my relationship. This is my third marriage. I think relationships under patriarchy are quite brutal for most women, especially.
Okay.
Um, and coming from sort of a fundamentalist background where, the man is the king of the home, and he tells you, he's the decides, controls all the money, decides what everything's going to be like, disciplines the children. Um, I don't actually really believe in disciplining children, and people always think I'm crazy when I say that. And people were so worried about how my children would end up, but I really, for the most part, steered away from that. And they're awesome. I kind of believe in just natural choices, and teaching kids, okay, well, you can do that, but then this may or may not happen, so you have to be prepared to accept the consequences. Um, so I would say my relationship now is 1,000 times better than almost anyone I know who's in a relationship, because it's built on honor, respect, trust, love. Um, yeah.
Okay. So
I don't
somebody,
I don't actually believe that you can have an equal relationship under patriarchy, because it's not set up that way. You could try really hard, and maybe. Um, I can't say that there aren't any, but I think it's rare.
yeah. Are there in the divine feminine, are there also what's the word I'm looking for? Denominations, or is it just one denomination? It's all one sort of thought process.
I mean, there's not denominations, but there's obviously, I mean, it's not a huge amount of people that are into goddesses. Maybe more that are in divine feminine. So I wouldn't say that there's denominations. I would say that there's definitely very different trains of thought,
Mhm.
and I think that's good. I don't really know that I believe in denominations. Just like I think this was before we got on the call, but just I have this thing that I don't really like to label myself or um, anyone else. Like I think that I prefer it to be more organically driven, and that mm, everybody has their own way of thinking. I think I don't really like having things be so dogmatic.
Got you. If somebody wants to get into the divine feminine, how can they start? What's the place they can go? What kind of resources are there?
Well, I'm a huge reader, so I always go to books. And actually, I have one here that this is I call my Bible.
Uh-huh.
This is a really great. Oh, I don't know if I'm getting this here right.
I
No,
see
wrong
it. The
way.
Great Cosmic
Um,
Woman.
if you want this is a pretty thick one. If you want like a thinner starting point, I would say like when God was a woman, because that's maybe 150 pages. This one's about 500 pages. But I mean, there's so many good resources. There's so many good social media sites. And it really depends on what you're looking for, because there's a lot out there, and there's a lot of different ways that you could go. You can go into looking at witches. You can look at
Mhm. Let,
yeah.
let's ask. Here's one that's going to happen, and that this is being the men that are watching this. They're going like, I can't get into the divine feminine. No way. What do you say to them? Just give me what's the words that you speak to the men who say, I can't get into the divine feminine.
Well, I don't think anyone should get into the divine feminine unless they really want to. I mean, I think it would be great for more men to look into it.
Mhm.
But I think that it's sort of something that you have to feel. Like I don't believe in compulsion or like telling anyone you should do this or you should do that. Um, I would say that if you would like to learn more about it, then do so and see. I think it benefits men as well, and I think that I mean, my husband comes from more of like a humanist secular um, background, but he loves. I mean, he spent like a year making a goddess, so he definitely and I think it is sort of like a longing, because that was, I mean, it's only recently that we had a male god. Before it was always a woman. So I think there is a longing, and of course, everybody is coming from their mother's womb, and they're, breastfed. So men also have this connection um, that they've been, you know, held in the womb, and they've been, if their mother breastfed, then they've been at her breast, and so I think in some ways, talking to men, and I have seen several men that were very resistant at first and very sort of like, oh,
Mhm.
it's bad or it's wrong or whatever, that came around and now find it like really, really comforting. So,
So let's say you've got a group of men, and they're open minded. You go, the compelling reason to follow the divine feminine is what?
well, imagine if you had a wonderful grandma. I know some people didn't, so I'm not going to stop at that. But if
Mine
you
was
had a
awesome.
wonderful grandma, and I don't know if you remember this, my grandma just gave great hugs, great cuddly hugs, and she was the person that I could just tell by the look in her eye that she loved me so much, no matter what.
Mhm.
That's that is me in a few sentences what the goddess is.
Gotcha. So to summarize, what I think I'm hearing is we've got control and shame versus love and openness.
Hmm.
Would that be a good way to kind of separate the two? Like,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, I don't want to be shamed into going to heaven. Oh my
Well,
God.
and what kind of heaven is that anyway? Like, I mean,
Um,
nobody likes to do things. It's like making yourself going to the gym and just being miserable the entire time. Like, why?
I don't know. Yeah, I tried the gym thing. It's hard, right? Um, Let's learn a little bit more about Trista. Let's dig into it. I'm gonna do something I do with a lot of people. We're gonna play a little game called This or That, and I'm gonna ask you. I'll give you two choices. You can pick one or the other, but not neither or both. So we'll start easy, and they might get harder as we go, or we might get stuck on one and just go for it. Let's start super, super, super easy. Goddess worship or God worship?
Goddess.
Okay, see how easy that one is? How about traditional religions or New Age spirituality? Mhm.
Uh, this is a trick question.
No, it's just
Um,
A or B.
hmm. Oh man,
There's no
I
wrong
guess
one.
New Age, but I'd almost say neither. But okay,
Okay, how about mythology or theology?
mythology,
Okay, um, how about faith or reason?
faith,
Okay, intuition or logic?
intuition,
Inner peace or outer success?
inner peace,
Okay, how about sacred feminine or sacred masculine?
sacred feminine.
Okay, yin or yang,
Ugh,
with the yin being more feminine but somewhat harsher, but and yang being the more soft but weirder. Or maybe they mix well.
that's another. I guess yin,
Okay. How about let's get a little harder. How about Mother Mary or Mary Magdalene?
Mary Magdalene.
Ah, why? I want to hear about this one.
I think there's a lot we don't know about both. And actually, I have kind of aversion to both Marys just because I'm sort of allergic to Christianity at this point. Although Mother Mary, is a very important figure in Islam as well. She's the only woman who has a chapter of the Quran dedicated to her.
Okay.
Um, but Mary Magdalene, I think at least has a little bit more leeway in how she's well, they're both kind of represented in a very narrow way, but if I had to choose, I would want to be Mary Magdalene.
Okay.
She seems more fun.
There you go. How about moon energy or sun energy?
Moon,
Okay. Um, biblical interpretation or personal spiritual experience?
personal.
Okay. How about divine feminine within all religions or divine feminine as a separate path?
I would say it's a separate path, but a lot of times you have to come from the one to get to the other.
Okay. Um, goddess as liberal being or goddess as as a symbolic archetype?
Did you say liberal or literal?
Literal being. I might have
Okay,
said
I thought you said liberal, so I was like, okay.
literal.
Um, I think literal because for me she's very real.
Okay. Where do you find the goddess? When you where is the goddess? I'm just asking.
Within.
Okay. Um, divine feminine as a transformative force or the divine feminine as a sustaining force? Transformative or sustaining?
I would say transformative.
Okay. Um, let's go with one more. Should divine femininity reshape existing religions or create a brand new spiritual path?
I would say the latter, but I would also make the caveat that this is the oldest spiritual path and that patriarchal religion was very thorough in massacring the goddess tradition.
How did that happen, by the way? Just
Well, that's a long, long book, but you know, gradually and thoroughly.
yeah.
If you even if you read within the Old Testament, it basically says all the things because they're even in the Old Testament they mention um, the goddess and how the idols were destroyed and all of these things and there's a lot of rape, pillage, murder, and everything else in the Bible. It's always interesting when people talk about the Bible is such a good book, and I'm like, have you actually read it? Because I have many times, and I could not really recommend it as a Actually, I have a funny story about there's actually a book that is about the Bible called Text of Terror. And I had it shipped to me here, and customs held it for like a month because they thought it was a book on terrorism. And I'm like, no, it's a book about the Christian religion and the Bible.
There you go. Well, we got to get people to, I want people to be able to stay in touch with you for sure. So we've got your website, thegirlgod.com. And you are on Facebook, like all of us these days, the Girl God. And you are on Instagram also at Girl God Books. So I'm going to leave this up on screen so people that can get in touch with you, ask you questions, figure out how to bring this into their communities, spread some word, get the love out into the world, and stop being shamed into doing what you probably don't want to do. So thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it.
Michael J., thank you so much. You're such a little love.
I just ask questions, but thank you very, very much. And we'll have to jump into some of these deeper topics next time you're on. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oh, we don't get to leave today.